Hi, guys. Welcome back to the Adaptive Zone podcast. My name is Matthew Boyd. I'm a physiotherapist and running coach. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to like and subscribe. And if you're so inclined, share it with a friend. Today we have Jason Fitzgerald back on the show, who just before we got on was making fun of my rather monotonous clothing choices. So, Jason, repeat offender joining us on the show. Thank you for coming back.
Well, thank you so much, Matt. No, I was more teasing you because it looks like we're wearing almost the same thing. And
yeah.
now that I have facial hair and am bald, and shave the head, where we look like brothers almost. It's a little strange.
And for those who can't see Jason, if you're listening, he's got a hat on. He was telling me the story of before the show. So share it with the listeners, Jason. Tell us what's going on with this hat.
Yeah, so the strength running hat is something that I wanted for myself because it's my favorite type of hat, my favorite style. It's something where the bill of the hat is super flexible. You can throw it in the washing machine. And so to get a strength running branded hat, I had to order 40 of them because that's the minimum order that you could have. So I have basically spent about $650 on my favorite hat, but don't regret it at all.
No, it's worth it, man. It looks like a $600 hat, definitely.
Thanks.
All right, cool. So today we're going to be talking about strength training and running and that kind of stuff. And just before we get into it, could you just, for the listeners who didn't catch the previous episodes or who aren't familiar with you, I don't think there'll be many, but could you just briefly introduce yourself and tell us a bit about your professional work?
Sure thing. So I am the founder and head coach of Strength Running. I'm a USATF certified coach and host of the Strength Running podcast. And I've been coaching for a little over 14 years now, since 2010. But I've been a runner since 1998. So I started when I was a freshman in high school, ran at the high school level, and then continued on running track and cross country at the collegiate level. And then post-collegiately got into, some of the longer road race distances, experimented a little bit with triathlon and some obstacle course races, just trying to, experience some of those different types of races. But strength running is where I try to help runners avoid a lot of the mistakes that I've made in my own running career and taking some of the best practices that I've learned from the 10 or so coaches I've had over my career, and also, all the people I've learned from on the Strength Running podcast. We're starting to come up on 400 episodes at this point, which is kind of wild for me to think about. And it's kind of amazing to think about, the high level performance experts and dietitians and sports psychologists and physical therapists that I've had on the show. And it's just been an amazingly wonderful professional opportunity for me to learn from all these folks. And so, my purpose right now with strength running is to elevate the sport by elevating your performances. So my entire goal is to help you become a better runner.
Yeah, and you're doing a wonderful job of spreading incredible, evidence-based and practical information through the podcast and your website. It's been awesome to watch your career develop. But today we're going to get your opinion. So if the listeners who are familiar with your show will know that most of the time we're listening to Jason interview experts. But today we're going to be, turning the mic around to get your thoughts on strength training, and particularly, we're going to do it in the form of like a little case study. So I've sort of come up with like a composite version of a runner that's a very typical, scenario that I see. And then we're going to sort of talk through how you would approach introducing them to strength training, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, that sounds exciting. Let's do it.
Okay, so I'm going to read out what we've got down for Nicole. So Nicole, my invented runner, has been running for 10 years, but she hasn't done any strength training. So she runs about 50K a week, and she does half marathons, 10K races a few times a year. So she's not currently injured. She's feeling good, but she has had trouble, as all runners have, with various injuries in the past, particularly knee pain when she gets to higher mileage, when the half marathon training volume builds up. So she's heard that strength training might help her avoid injuries and pain. And she's also heard that it might be good for her performance, but she's really not sure where to start. Does that make sense?
Sounds like a very, very common scenario to me.
Yes, definitely. Okay, so if we start with the obvious one, like Nicole's wondering if strength training would help her reduce her injury risk and help her improve performance. Is she correct on that? Would that help Nicole with those things?
Yes, I think so. I think, beside just structuring really well-structured training and making sure that you're doing appropriate workouts, appropriate mileage levels with appropriate progressions there. The second best thing you can do to help prevent injuries is to add some strength training to your running program. It's going to help you not only develop stronger muscles, which are going to be a little bit more, ready, willing, and able to absorb some of the impact forces of running, but it's also going to toughen up all those connective tissues, in your joints, like your ligaments and tendons, and even strengthen your bones. So it's really almost like, this invisible suit of armor that you're putting over your body that's going to just help protect you from, the impact of running, but also from running mistakes, training errors. And this is where a lot of runners get hurt, is where, they accidentally do something that they shouldn't have done. They go for an 18-mile long run when, their longest run was only 14 miles. Or, they go for a group run and they end up running a lot faster than they know they should have, but they felt good, even though a coach may say, hey, I know you felt good, but that wasn't like a smart thing to do with your long run. These things happen. And strength training allows you to make just a little bit more of these training errors, which we all make, let's be clear, and just come away from those errors with a higher likelihood of not suffering some, season ending injury. So yes, I think it's a great idea. And, the good news is that she's never done any strength training. So we can start pretty conservatively and pretty simply at the very beginning.
Hmm. Yeah, so you were saying it's almost like it gives her some wiggle room. So if she accidentally does a little bit too much too soon, she's got a bit more reserve because of the strength that she's been gaining.
Exactly. And the other thing about strength training is that it's not just strength that you're building. You're also building coordination, general athleticism. You're building a little bit more proprioception. You're essentially just becoming a better athlete, working on movement patterns that are a little bit different than running. Running tends to be a pretty one-dimensional sport, and supplementing your
Hmm.
training with strength training, with some cross training, with some dynamic mobility drills. All these things really help you move better. And someone who can move better, someone who has that extra coordination, they're just going to be more efficient and economical. So, really helpful for injury prevention, but also for your performance.
And in terms of performance, like if she were to add strength training in and keeping all other things even, like as much as we could, would that likely make her like faster in her half marathons or 10Ks?
That's a really good question. So, it depends on the time frame that we're talking about, and it does depend on the type of strength training that this hypothetical runner is doing. So, at the beginning, I would likely urge this fictitious runner to start doing some body weight strength training. And it's really helpful to just plug in a routine into your program rather than figuring out like, oh, what exercises should I do? What order, how many repetitions? Should I do 2 sets, maybe 3? Like what's the recovery in between each exercise? You don't have to figure out everything. There's a lot of specific workout routines that you can just add to your training. And, this is the very kind of simple way of adding some basic strength training to your schedule. And what I would say is, at the beginning, what you're going to find is that this kind of work makes you a little sore and it's an added stress. And so at the very beginning, it's not really doing much for you. It's just making you sore. But part of that is a good thing, because then you're gaining a little bit of extra strength and you're going to gain a little bit more running economy. You're going to improve your running economy slightly. Now, with body weight exercises, you're probably going to get less of a stimulus to improve your running economy, but nevertheless, I think it's better than nothing. And it's also going to reduce the likelihood that you suffer a serious injury. So, in a 3 to 12 month time frame, what does that actually mean? That means you're probably going to be able to train a little bit more consistently because you're going to have fewer aches, pains, and niggles. It also means that you might slightly improve your running economy so that at the end of a long run or a workout or a longer race, like say a 10K or a half marathon, you're able to maintain better form for a little bit longer. So, I think you're going to get faster because you're going to train more consistently because you're not getting injured so much. I think you're going to get faster because your running economy is going to improve and you're going to, fall apart, for lack of a better phrase, a little bit less at the end of a race or a long run. And, you're also, I think, just going to be a little bit more economical during, the first 80% or so of a race or a long run. And that's just going to help you burn a little bit less energy so that you can save it for the end. So, the beginner oriented strength training is almost like easy running. It doesn't really make you faster at first, but long term, when done consistently, it has more and more of an effect.
So it's almost indirectly in that first year, because the strength you get allows you to train more because you're not injured. So that makes you faster. And it means that in the later parts of a race, you lose your form a little bit later so that you can hold it longer, so you run a bit faster in that way. And that's kind of the ways that strength training may benefit your performance in the first year, even if it's not sort of directly improving your performance. Is that right?
Yeah, I think that's fair. And a year might be a little bit of a long time frame. This might be your 3 to 6 month time frame for looking at these kinds of benefits. And this is also assuming that we're not adding in any other kinds of strength training. This is just these body weight routines. You might be doing lunges, squats, planks, bridges, some of the fundamental body weight movements that I think are fundamental for a reason, and they're very basic and simple, but they are the fundamentals for a very good reason. We shouldn't ignore them. And, those are those exercises that I think are going to really help you with some of the things we've been talking about.
So let's say if Nicole were to come to you and say, I haven't done strength training before, I'm very keen, but I have no idea. What would you have her do exercise wise, and how often, and for the first couple of weeks, let's say the first month, while she's kind of getting used to it?
So for the first month, I would actually start before her runs, and I would have her start doing a dynamic warm up before she would start running. And a dynamic warm up is usually a combination of some, relatively easy strength exercises and some mobility exercises. And the goal here is really to elevate your heart rate, your respiration, lubricate your joints, increase your body temperature slightly, increase blood flow, particularly to your extremities. And so this kind of work is really helpful at metabolically priming you for the run, but it also does include some strength training. And so maybe for the first couple of weeks, I would just have her do a dynamic warm up, because she's likely going to, feel a little bit sore or uncoordinated doing some of these movements, things like lunges or leg swings. There's all kinds of weird mobility exercises that, lend themselves a little better to video rather than a podcast. If it's helpful, I can actually just provide you some of these videos and you could link to them in the show notes. But,
Cool.
The dynamic warm up, I think, solves a couple problems. It's a good warm up before your run. It does introduce you to strength training. So you start building a little bit more strength over time. And it just helps you with that coordination, that athleticism. And after a couple of weeks of doing a dynamic warm up before you go running, most runners stick with it because they see the before and after. They viscerally experience and feel the effects of doing that dynamic warm up. And for someone who, maybe gets up in the morning and, has a quick shot of espresso and a banana and then heads out the door, compared with a person who spends 8 to 10 minutes doing that dynamic warm up, you're probably never going to go back because you feel better. The first mile isn't so clunky and awkward, and you're just, oh man, things don't feel good. You feel much better much earlier in the run. So I would start there, and I would have her do that before every run. After a week or two, I would have her start doing maybe a 10 to 15 minute body weight strength routine after each run. And then this would be that sandwiching method that I like to use with my athletes, where we are sandwiching every run in between that dynamic warm up and then a pretty simple body weight routine that comes after the run. And I think this is great because you're giving yourself an on ramp to the run and then an off ramp after the run back to being sedentary. And that just makes you feel better in addition to, all the great benefits that we've been talking about.
Yeah, cool. So she's been going a month, Nicole, and she's doing a dynamic warm up. She's doing a little sort of wind down strength, body weight strength routine after every run, and that's going well. So the sort of muscular soreness she was getting at first from it being new is kind of gone now, and it just feels good. She feels good on her run. She feels good afterwards, and she kind of wants to take it to the next level with her strength training. Where would you take her from there?
From here, I would probably give her some more advanced body weight exercises. So, instead of a 30-second side plank, would build up to a 60-second side plank. We might throw in some lateral leg raises with that side plank. So you're really activating, the hip musculature on the side that's closest to the ground. If we're doing a warm-up routine, we might be doing 20 lunges to help ourselves warm up. We might increase that to 50 lunges before every single run. And of course, we're going to do a whole variety of lunges to really open up our range of motion in a whole different variety of ways. But part of the equation is volume. So, more lunges, a longer plank, more push-ups, that kind of thing. And part of it is complexity. So adding in a more advanced version of an exercise. So you might start doing body weight squats, and then you might start doing assisted single leg squats, and then you'll start doing unassisted single leg squats, and then you can really progress a lot of these exercises to a slightly more advanced version. The other thing that I would recommend is let's start adding a little bit of resistance. We don't have to get into the weight room right now and get next to the CrossFit bro who's throwing up 300 pounds in the squat rack. We might not be ready for that, but we can use a resistance band. We can use a medicine ball. We can use a lot of different things just to add 10 pounds, 20 pounds, or a little bit of resistance to a lot of these exercises, just so that we can keep progressing. I'm always looking for ways to progress an athlete. And, I'm a coach that likes to take their time. I don't want to rush things. I want to have you do low volume body weight exercises to high volume to resistance. And then we might get into the gym and start doing some heavier weightlifting. But it's only after building this foundation of general strength through mostly body weight exercises. I mean, of course, we might use that medicine ball and do some more advanced movements with an implement, but these are relatively simple implements that anyone can have at their house, and they don't really need a big space for it.
And this kind of foundational phase, how long? I know it would depend on the person and how they were responding, but just kind of on average, if everything goes according to plan, how long do you think this phase might last?
I think 2 to 4 months. I think most runners are pretty ready to start lifting weight after 2 to 4 months because, it's not like we're starting completely from scratch. Even if they haven't been doing any strength training, they have been running. So there is some level of fitness, some level of athletic competence that we're dealing with. And so I think a lot of runners after, a couple months of doing some body weight exercises, developing the habit, I think that's a big part of it too, is not necessarily when are you physiologically ready for heavier weightlifting, but when are you psychologically ready to get into the gym twice a week? When are you ready to commit to that level of training? You might buy into the whole idea of weightlifting, but if you don't have the time or willingness to actually get it done, then it almost doesn't matter, right? So I think a couple months with the body weight work is not only enough physically, but it's also enough to build that really healthy habit so that we can then take the next step and maybe get into the gym.
Well, I guess I didn't clarify for this foundational phase. Do you expect that they'll be doing these sort of sandwiched routines before and after each run, or is it some point you sort of move them to a separate workout, or do you always keep it kind of pinned to the runs? How do you do that?
Got it. Okay. So I would pretty much never have an athlete not sandwich their runs. Of course, there are some very short recovery runs where you don't really need to do a dynamic warm up beforehand. You're just going to take the first mile super easy. With that said, I do think most adult runners are lacking in strength and athleticism, and I would just have you do it anyway. It's just this is coordination training. It's training you to be a better athlete. We're not always doing the bare minimum. It's sort of like asking your teacher, like, what's the minimum I have to do to pass the test? Your teacher's probably not really going to like that question. So as a coach, I don't really like the question of like, well, when can I skip the dynamic warm up? It's like, why? Let's just
Yeah.
keep getting those benefits. I think things start to change when you start adding weightlifting workouts into your program. So in that scenario, I would simply replace 2 of the body weight workouts that we were doing after, 2 of our runs during the week with a weightlifting workout. Now, of course, some weightlifting workouts, they're going to start to get challenging, and some runners might struggle a little bit with doing that on the same day as a run, especially if that run was a faster workout or a long run. And, I'm sure some of your listeners have heard of this rule of polarization, where we want to keep our hard days hard and our easy days easy. And that is, I think, a very, very excellent rule. But with that said, you can sometimes just make your day too hard. And I know for me personally, for example, I always struggled with lifting weights after running like a 20-mile long run, no matter if I napped and ate a lot of food. Like I didn't have the energy for a weightlifting session after I just rocked a 20-mile long run. And so we can also do it on days where we're not running, as long as we are maintaining 1 or 2 very easy or even completely off recovery days during the week. But for the most part, you're just going to replace 2 of those body weight sessions.
Cool. Okay. And then, so let's say Nicole's been doing this and it's been like 4 months and it's all going really well. And she's starting to feel more confident with all the movements and it's fitting into our schedule, no problem. And then, like you said, there's going to be this kind of somewhat challenging time now where you're like, okay, if we're going to take it to the next level, you might have to change the schedule a little bit, potentially get equipment or a gym involved. Like, what does that kind of next phase look like for Nicole, presuming that's what she wants to do?
So yeah, presuming that she wants to get into the gym and lift weights, and she has access to either a gym or a pretty well-stocked home gym, here's where I would just have her do 2 weightlifting workouts per week. I think any more and it starts to interfere with your running training. So 2 a week is fine. I sort of think of, these hard lifting workouts sort of like your speed workouts, in that they are stressful. You're challenging the nervous system. It's just very different from running. And if we do it too often, we're just going to over fatigue ourselves and, maybe succumb to some overtraining symptoms. And so because of that, we want to limit ourselves to about twice a week, just like kind of like a speed workout. Most runners, I think 2 speed workouts a week is either enough or the maximum that they would want to do. And I wouldn't want to have them do any more than that for weightlifting as well. And then, you can start to get really fancy with some weightlifting principles and ideas if you really wanted to, what I would call lift ideally. So in an ideal scenario, yeah, you'd be in the gym twice a week lifting relatively heavy weight. I think there's real value in heavy weightlifting for runners, but also more explosive weightlifting for runners, doing some Olympic lifts, doing some power movements where you're really focused on moving quickly. Because after all, one of the benefits that we want to gain from lifting weights is the benefit of power. And what is power? Power is just strength expressed quickly. And if you think about sprinting or running very fast, when you see some of these elite marathoners and they're gliding to the finish of a marathon and they're running like 4:30-mile pace, the amount of power that they are producing, I know it looks very easy for them, but these are the best in the world. They're like, their job is to make it look easy, but they are producing so much power and they're doing it so quickly. Those foot strikes are less than 1/10 of a second, and they are putting so much force into the ground. So when we understand like that is what speed is all about, then our weightlifting has to really train those skills, those physical skills. So lifting heavy weights, but also doing more explosive movements. And then I think the final step to all this, the fanciest way of structuring your weightlifting is periodizing it, just like your running training, so that when you're doing some base training, you're not doing power movements. You're building general strength. You're focused a little bit more on injury prevention. And then as you get closer to your goal race, you're doing more and more of those explosive movements. You're adding in plyometrics so that you can express that strength very quickly. And, the goals of that weightlifting program are generally aligned with the goals of your running program. They're all sort of working towards that peak performance, that goal race at the end of the plan.
So you say you move Nicole through this sort of higher level phase and then into the kind of more advanced phase when she's ready, where she's including some power movements, some Olympic lifting and stuff. And then you're looking at like the next 2 years, how you're going to sort of plan the seasons out. I think if I'm understanding correctly, you might keep that 2 workouts a week, but more in the base building period is going to be kind of lifting heavy but not really powerful kind of stuff, not as much plyometric work. And then as she moved more towards the goal race, as the training peaks, there'd be more power work, there'd be more plyometric work, there'd be more like max lifting kind of stuff. Is that kind of what you mean?
Yeah, that's the general progression of things. And it really tracks nicely with the running training that you're going to do. Like let's say you're training for a half marathon, when you're 20 weeks out from that half, you're not going to be running really, really hard, fast workouts. You're probably going to be in more base phase of training. You're doing more aerobic workouts. Of course, you're doing some strides. You're doing some kind of, general speed development type work, but it's not difficult. It's fast, but it's not difficult. And that's the big differentiator. And the early phases of weightlifting are very much like the early phases of a running plan, base training, a little bit more general, not as difficult, but perhaps higher volume. And then things progress over the course of the season. And, just like speed workouts, any kind of faster structured workout that you're doing, there's also weeks during the year where you don't want to do that at all. So the week after your marathon, don't do any fast workouts, or don't do any hard lifting workouts. Don't even do any easy lifting workouts. This is the time to rest. Maybe the first couple weeks as you return to running from a marathon or a half marathon, some goal race, now's not the time to be doing hard workouts. It's not the time to be lifting weights. Maybe there's a month after your goal race where you're just doing body weight work. You're not doing any hard workouts. You're just doing some strides. If you wanted to get in the gym once a week and maybe do some kind of easier workout that's not too challenging, I think that's fine. But, there's a time and a place for everything, including shutting it down and resting.
Cool. I think that nicely brings us through from the very like, how do I do my first workout and how do I do it for the first month, like all the way through to like the most advanced high level periodized kind of approach. And that's really nice to see for someone who's like, oh, I feel like I should be doing this. It sounds like it's really good for me, but I don't know where to start. That gives people a nice sort of path forward to look at. I guess I didn't ask you in advance, but do you have anything like, if the listener's interested in learning more from you about like strength training, any resources or particular episodes of your show or anything that you might point them towards?
Yeah, I mean, I have a whole bunch of stuff, which is actually hilarious because I used to be the runner that thought you didn't need any strength training, and then I actually learned and learned better. But no, strength training I think is so important. I don't even consider it cross training. It's just part of the training we need as runners to fully express our potential. So yeah, I've created a lot of different resources for runners. If you want to go to strengthrunning.com/strength, I have an email series set up where you're going to get one lesson a day on, what are the benefits I can expect? What are some example exercises, for power, for example? What are some of the big mistakes? That's something that we haven't discussed was, you can go into the gym and you can lift 101 different ways. And not all of them are really effective for runners, and some of them can actually be counterproductive for runners. So for example, a lot of runners have heard of, leg day or bis and tris day or back day. This is taken from the world of bodybuilding, where you isolate individual muscles
Mhm.
and you're just focused on hypertrophy or muscle growth. This isn't what we runners want at all. We don't want to gain really any weight in the gym. Maybe our body composition will change a little bit. That's healthy and wanted, but we don't really want to pack on 15 pounds of muscle. It's just going to slow us down in races. And so the way in which we lift has to be structured in a way that is focused on strength and power rather than on growing our muscles. And there's clear ways of doing that. So I think that email series is very helpful. I partnered with a USA weightlifting national coach who worked with a whole bunch of pro runners up here in Boulder, Colorado, to put together an actual weightlifting program.
Oh, nice.
That's at strengthrunning.com/HPL. It's called High Performance Lifting. This is like all the bells and whistles. This is that periodized, progressive, specific to running weightlifting program that's going to bring you, from day one to the final day of your training plan and just tell you exactly what to do in the gym, with regard to those explosive lifts, the foundational work at the beginning, but then also when and how to add in some plyometrics. So those are probably two of the better resources. But the Strength Running podcast features so many different strength experts. It's hard for me to point to a specific episode after 360 something. I think I've forgotten at this point. But you could go on strengthrunning.com and just search strength training or weightlifting or a related term, and you're going to be shown a whole bunch of resources that are going to be super helpful.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, I can put links in the show notes to both those. They sound perfect. So it was strengthrunning.com/strength and one strengthrunning.com/HPL. I'll put those both in the show notes for people. And then, looking at your podcast feed on strength running and just typing in strength or strength training or weightlifting, and that'll be a good way to get some audio content from experts on the same subject. And I think this was an excellent starting point for the runners who are interested in getting into it a little bit more. So thank you for coming on to sort of share your wisdom around strength training for runners. It was really interesting. So thank you, Jason.
Oh, well, thank you, Matt. And I think one last thing I just want to impress upon any runner is that, I know we talked about ideal strength training and this like periodized weightlifting plan with Olympic lifts, and it can get overwhelming. And so one message I have for everyone is something is better than nothing. I would so much rather you do some kind of strength training, whatever you can do, than nothing at all. Because I think something is definitely better than nothing. You're going to get some of those benefits. You're going to get a little bit stronger. You're going to build some kind of foundation of strength. So when you do have a little bit more time or willingness or equipment or whatever that you need, and you want to take the next step, you've already gotten started to a certain extent, and you're just further ahead on this journey. So don't think you have to be perfect right from the beginning. You can get started with almost anything, kind of like running. You don't have to start your running journey with a 10-mile run. You can go for a mile, you can see how it feels, and then you can build from there. So Matt, thanks so much for a good chat. This was great.
Yep, I think that's a wonderful note to end it on. So definitely. I think you're going to see, it's like diminishing returns, right? So like anything where you first get into it, you get a lot of the benefits early on from not a lot of, it doesn't have to be super precise as long as you do it kind of in a safe and sensible way. And I think that's the kind of takeaway there is just like get started and don't be too intimidated by the details, which I certainly get. Like when you listen to podcasts and stuff, we get excited about the details and the different methods, but it's like, if you're just interested in getting started, don't make it too complicated, like you said.
Yeah, it's both simple and complex. It's simple to get started. And if you want to make it complex, you certainly can. And I think you'll benefit from that complexity, but it's not needed at the beginning. I will be the first to admit it's overwhelming, and it does take a certain level of commitment, both in terms of time and some resources. But if you just get started, what's going to happen is you're going to start to feel some of those benefits. And then that is like, rolling the snowball down the hill. All of a
Mm.
sudden you're like, oh, I like the way that I look a little bit better. I feel better on this run. Oh, that long run didn't take as much out of me. I rebounded from that run much better than I usually do. And then you start compounding some of those benefits. And it's just like running. I think weightlifting is very similar to running. It's just on the opposite side of the sports spectrum, which is one of the reasons why I love it so much. Like, there's so many similarities. And I think runners will quickly fall in love with the progress and the progression that they experience with strength training, just like they fell in love with running because of the progress they experienced with, their 5K time or their half marathon time. So it's just another way of kind of getting more out of your own body, and that being really exciting, and putting in the work and then getting these results from the other side of it. For me personally, that's why I love running and training. And I think if runners are consistent with strength training and feel those benefits, they're much more likely to actually make it a consistent habit.
Wonderful. Perfect note to end on. Jason, thank you for joining us again. I'll put links in the show notes to everything you mentioned there. And yeah, really appreciate it. Thanks, mate.
Thank you, Matt.